started. We've got a little bit of a fun day today. We need to be able to celebrate the other person on this call. So, Paige, huge happy birthday to you.
Thank you.
This is great. I appreciate you taking the time on your birthday.
Yeah, of course. This is one of my favorite things to do is work on this and, try to just better the state. I don't know. That sounds cheesy, but I'm happy to be here.
You're doing great. So, I really appreciate you again taking the time. So, hope you get to enjoy some of that pizza you mentioned earlier tonight. So, that's good. All right, so let's talk about a couple of things. We're going to be able to break down some things about the way COVID-19 is affecting Ohio's prisons, and we want to be able to talk a little bit about a new law that's been or a new bill that's been introduced in the Ohio House of Representatives that concerns collective bargaining, union rights, and overall wage points. So let's start with COVID-19 in prisons. Paige, do you want to break down a little bit about what the size, scope, scale, what that looks like, and what the response has at least started to be?
Yes. So, Ohio has a few prisons, and data shows that and a lot of them there's overcrowding, which obviously going into a crisis like this, no one expected that, that no one was like, oh, I'm going to do this, obviously. But recent updates are currently 4 workers and 63 inmates have passed away by coronavirus, which is obviously tragic and deeply upsetting. And numbers are showing that over 4,500 inmates have tested positive, but we also know that testing isn't perfect and that false negatives are coming up. It's still in a scary amount, which is obviously something we need to work on. And it was surprising for me to see that when this first started to crop up, stuff like that, Ohio got on top of it. We closed visitation as one of the first states, and we started mass testing inmates. But since then, we've kind of moved away from that strategy, which I personally don't think is the best move, because we have a lot of data showing that people in general, but obviously people in these prisons are positive but asymptomatic. And they're walking around and they're spreading it to people. And that's why out here we're doing social distancing, we're wearing our masks, because we don't know. You just can't know, and we're not at the spot where we can test everyone. But obviously in a prison where there's literally no way to social distance, mass testing is the strategy we need to stick with and not move away from.
Yeah. So one of the problems we've seen, or at the very least, is that prison populations, because there are still staff members and things that are being exposed to these large collectivized outbreaks within prisons, and the people within those prisons are not able to properly social distance in any meaningful way, just based off of the design of prisons themselves, that the prisons, by their nature of working with the staff members who have to report every single day to those places, we've seen miniature little outbreaks that have then occurred around prisons that have had larger outbreaks in and of themselves. And so it's not just a problem. Some people can think of it as it's a prison problem. It's not something we have to really worry about. It's only for those inmates and those staff members. But we have to consider the fact that prisons are not these isolated islands that exist in the middle of the Great Lakes, and we don't have to worry about them. Those are people's family members too, and those the staff members are we have to be primarily concerned about, and we have to be concerned about the communities around them as a whole. So, like you said, I think the mass testing is something that we should be able to continue doing at the very least, because all the studies show that enclosed spaces are one of the worst ways possible to be able to continue spreading the virus.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest points is that we moved from a mass testing strategy to only testing people who are showing symptoms. And like I said, you don't have to be showing symptoms to be both positive and contagious. And that's what's really scary about this disease in general, but also really scary about, like you said, having it in a confined space where there's literally no way to avoid contact. I mean, that's why universities shut down, because you can't have dorms and social distance. Just doesn't make any sense, and it doesn't work. And obviously we can't shut down prisons. that's not feasible, but we can do as much as we can to remove people who are positive and spreading to isolated places. And we won't know that unless we're mass testing.
Yeah, and one of the things that we see talked about a lot is if so many people are asymptomatic and such a large percentage of prison population is asymptomatic, the general population is asymptomatic when they contract this virus, is why is it as big of a concern if only such a small number are actually getting it? Is what we've actually seen in addition is the main item of why we thought maybe children aren't as susceptible to this in the first place is because they never got any symptoms. They might contract the virus, have the virus, and then there's no problems thereafter. But we've continued to see the fact that asymptomatic patients, starting with some of the studies done in England and a recent New York Times story about this, on the fact that those people who are asymptomatic can then develop, especially in young school-age children, can then develop new types of symptoms not related to the coronavirus thereafter. So we still don't entirely understand how this disease works. We don't understand how it can change depending on the different kinds of people that it infects. And so we have to continue this kind of mass testing program that we originally did, which was the right strategy, and we should continue doing. So yeah, I think that's the primary point there. One of the things we wanted to be able to talk about today, in addition, is this prevailing wage law that has come up, sponsored by several House Republicans, including District 54's own Paul Zellweger. Paige, do you want to be able to break a little bit down about what that bill is about?
Yeah, so prevailing wage is a program that sets a certain wage rate for workers working on publicly funded projects, I believe at costing more than $250,000. So the point of that is to ensure that the mostly construction workers who are working on updates and new projects and just like generally bettering the state, obviously, publicly funded projects are going towards like updating things and just, making sure we have things all safe and set, so that they're being paid a fair wage. And it goes by, the wage is determined by whatever the collective bargaining agreement is in the area. And if there isn't one, then the closest one.
Okay. Yeah. So that's obviously just a simple way to be able to ensure that large publicly funded projects, that when we do have when the state is spending so much money on a construction project or an infrastructure basis in these particular areas, that the workers there are paid a fair wage in comparison to the areas surrounding. So it's a simple law, but it's been tried to be repealed over and over and over and over again because very extremist Republicans in the Ohio State House simply have this idea that unions are bad, collective bargaining is bad, and so during this time of national economic and public health crises, we continue to see them make attacks on people's wages. We just saw today the numbers that 40 million Americans are now unemployed as a result of this economic catastrophe, and the idea that we would try to revoke a way to ensure that laborers are paid a fair wage is about as ridiculous and tragic as it gets. So one other thing that was pointed out, we talked a little bit about this before the show started, on personal interests that kind of creep into this bill. One of the primary sponsors of the bill, Representative Hood. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, Paige?
Yeah, so it was pointed out in some of the articles that I was looking to, is that specifically Representative Hood, but then also possibly some of the other representatives involved have a financial interest in eliminating the law, that they are investing in these types of projects or having companies that get these contracts through the state. And then obviously they would wish to pay their workers less because then they get to have more money. And so then eliminating this law would make that possible. But obviously, this is not a time to be looking at personal self-gain. This is a time to come together and to understand that, okay, I'm going to need to make a little bit less so that these people who are struggling, who've been out of work possibly for months, especially coming out of like the winter season, construction workers, like we're going into when they're supposed to be really working, and like construction work, especially outdoor work, is one of the like employee jobs we can ensure semi-safety, distance and masks and stuff like that. So it's one of the industries that we can hopefully get going in a safe way. Like I said, especially going into these warmer months. And so seeing someone, like you said, take advantage of that or try to take away from that is just tragic.
Over the years, there's been so many numerous attempts to enact right to work as a basis for let's continue to try to get rid of unions and collective bargaining and otherwise as a way to drive down costs, quote unquote. And drive down costs, we mean eliminate those higher paying wage jobs for people. So this is just plain and simple another attack on unions and on hardworking Ohioans. So it'll be defeated, and it should be defeated. So I look forward to being able to, if it were to ever come in front of my desk as a state representative, I can promise you that would receive an immediate no vote. So I think that's all we have for today for the review. Again, Paige, happy birthday. Please enjoy the rest of your day, and I hope to be able to see you all next week, same time, same place. Hope to see you all there.